All right, next session. We've discussed people staying in the box verbally in the battle of words that can go on in these question things, whether it's a friendly thing or an unfriendly thing. I could stay in the box all day long verbally and never say the wrong thing, but for the average American, if they get my laptop, my cell phone, and my day planner, they won't need to ask any questions. So this next little section here, I really just want to cover the other ways people are surprised and shocked to find out that they've leaked out information they really didn't want to leak out. And we'll start with computers because there's many people travel with them, short-term folks, tourists, a lot of people are traveling with their laptops. And if you stopped and thought about it from the perspective we've been teaching today, what's on a computer that might increase your value or give you more questions to have to answer or more details? They're wanting to call your mom and some friends for ransom, and now they have your contact list. And what's in your contact list? What kind of names? And because of my kind of work, I had a lot of Congress official folks in my contact list who really wouldn't do anything to save me in a crisis. But what's that look like to a guy who just pulls up a list of names he's seen in the media? It looks like I'm worth keeping longer, and that was not my objective. So what are our options with laptops and things? We want to take them, we need them maybe. So there are some software options. There are encryption programs. Even Microsoft's XP, the standardized encryption that comes with it, meets some pretty good specs. The key thing would be to put something on there and it's got to be one, something that requires a password. And a lot of people just don't want to have the hassle of having to type that in every time, so they'll take it off. And we could go all day on stories where people lost. They spent years never saying they were a missionary and had their laptop stolen with all the missionaries and their home addresses for the entire region listed on them. And it wasn't encrypted because it was just so much work to deal with. So software options, I'd think about some kind of encryption. It doesn't always cost money. It sometimes even comes standard with your computers. And I'd think about passwords. 15 characters or more is a standard that really makes it tough. If I've got some good Microsoft or some other form of encryption and I put 15 characters into my password, it's going to take somebody with a supercomputer a long time to get into my laptop. And that's what I need, because they're not really going to spend that much time. We don't see short-termers spending 10 years in jail while they run through your laptop. If we can get through a day or so of them not digging into that, it's going to become a non-issue and we can move on. I'd think about what I keep things on. If it doesn't do any good to encrypt your laptop if all your important stuff's on your jump drive or on something. A lot of situations where I go into less than pleasant situations, we'll carry a lot of our critical stuff on a CD or on a flash drive, something that can be broken in half, because there is no unencryption for a broken one. That does put a stop to it. So I think about that, and I think about just how much information I carry. When I go overseas for a short-term trip, why did I take all those other files and things? Even if the thing's just stolen, which is what happens to most, they're stolen for cash, what have I lost that I could have just backed up at home and left at home that I didn't want to even talk about? It's the same with paperwork. I'm going to have some travel papers and things. I recently was sharing a story, and this missionary was telling me about how he developed his STS and he had all that down really good, but he was struggling with remembering it, so he wrote it all out. And then as he's going through his papers, as he's coming up on customs, he finds his note that he's typed out. Remember, my story is titled, my little story here. Probably not a good thing to carry with you. So I'd limit what I carried on paper, and I'd think about, I hear this, I'll just get rid of it if there's an emergency. Okay, one sheet of paper. I don't know if you've eaten a sheet lately, but it doesn't work as good as it does in the movies. I'd think about it, but I know folks who've gotten caught, particularly if they've been overseas for a few weeks or a few months and they're collecting up information. Maybe it's names and addresses of people they've been talking to that they'd rather not share with the government or with bad guys. And now somebody comes through the door and they're realizing, I have 2 reams of paper over there and about 3 minutes to get rid of it. Now that's a lot of eating. And so you might want to think about how much you keep and what you do with it. Cell phones are really becoming a vulnerability. Most of us want to have one and carry them. when you go overseas, your U.S. cell phone is not going to work unless you got a tri-band or a quad band. That's not a bad thing, because right now, if I took your cell phone and opened it up, I'd have the answers to a lot of my questions. How would you feel as I stood there and went through your dialing list and started saying, I have so-and-so and we're going to do something bad to her in 2 hours if you don't? That'd be hard on you. So think about what contact list you carry. I carry a separate cell phone overseas that has like 5 critical names in the contact list that I'll need on that trip of people. And I left out the family list and the home list and all of those things. Cell phones are easy to tap. You do need to know that in a lot of closed countries, it is happening. Missionary conversations, stuff we thought only happened to government guys. People are getting their phones tapped, and the cell phone is the easiest thing to listen into. So you want to think about what you say on it. Cell phones can be used as a microphone. There's a lot of countries now who have the technology. The same thing that tells your cell phone to turn on and hear your voice can be turned on remotely, so that someone can listen to anything you're saying in the room because your phone is on without you dialing it. That's happened in several cases, and it's led to some problems. And then tracking. Even the state of Missouri let a contract out here last year using the average person's cell phone, which sends out a locator signal every so many seconds, to track speed of cars. Now that's how close they could get you to your location. So now I'm picked up in a country where I'm not supposed to be doing some things, and they have my cell phone records showing at whose house I was at and for how many hours. And I just talked with a missionary who had to go through that, and that's the first words out of the interrogator's mouth. Tell us what you were doing at Mrs. Wang's house for 3 hours. Mrs. Who? I mean, the conversation, we've already gone past the box. So cell phones, the only surefire answer is pull the battery out. Right now, that's the only way to stop the tracking things. Pull the battery out.
Even if it's off?
I'm sorry?
Even if it's off? Mm-hmm.
Turning it off will not stop them from turning it back on, and it doesn't stop the tracking feature. We had our first U.S. case last year where they used a cell phone to track the guy to the scene of the crime, of a murder, as a crime boss. It was admitted as evidence. So now it's public fact that governments can turn phones on and track with them and can use them for listening devices. And if they can do it, I mean, we already know that some of the organized crime groups and the Al-Qaedas and the Russian mafias are doing those things. And we've had several missionaries suffer from it because it's been used against them. Okay? So I'd consider those things. The last thing I want to talk about is protecting information from non-interrogators. I'd like to cover that in this section real quick. People who are not the bad guys. People who are, I'm being held in a jail, and I know better than to say too much to the jailer who's asking nasty questions, but in comes the nurse I asked for. And she's got a few questions. Well, what medicines are you on? What are your allergies? Who's your home doctor? What's your emergency contact in case something goes wrong? And pretty soon I'm answering the same questions that I was being asked by the interrogator. So we call these non-interrogators. Guy comes in and says, hi, I'm with ABC News. And he begins to ask me questions that I wouldn't have answered from the guy who said he was a bad guy, but I might from them. We're going to give you 3 rules of thumb. Number 1, if I'm being held, I'm never going to be in a position to even verify this guy is who he says he is. And it'll just drive you nuts. So I'm not going to talk to you. I don't know your ABC News. That might be a waste of a good opportunity. So we're going to say take them for who they say they are. Rule number 2, take them for whatever you can get from them. Information, support, help. Your ABC News, could you tell me what's going on with my case? Can you say what's the U.S. government? They're not telling me everything. Tell me. So, you're a nurse. Could you get us some medicine? Could I get some food? Use that person for who they say they are and what they say they're, if they really are legitimate, they're going to let you do that. And if they're not, they're going to have to play along. And then the third rule that makes it okay is just never tell them anything you wouldn't say in front of the bad guy. Because even if they are legit, this is a Red Cross nurse who's been allowed in. Who else is listening in my cell? People fall for that one all the time. You're so thrilled to see a fellow American or a fellow Westerner that the next thing you know, you're saying things that you wouldn't have said to a guy who's announced that he's a bad guy or that, but you'll say it to a fellow American. So we've got to think about all of those things that come up with non-interrogators. Just think it through. Until I know where I am and who's listening, I'll stick to my STS, and that will avoid a compromise.
In your listening guide are additional documents dealing with information security that could be beneficial to you before going on your trip. take time to look over these documents, and then resume viewing the final part of Session 3, talking about how to deal with the media in a crisis.